This Saligao Institute, 100 years old, 98 to be precise, has been doing its part for the village of Saligao in the field of literature, sports, cultural activities, and a lot of traditional activities also for the members of this institute. We've been active earlier. In COVID it was a little low and back now in form. And today we are here to support one of the daughters of this village, Yvonne Vaz, for the launch of her book. On behalf of the Saligao Institute, I welcome all of you here. Thank you.
Thank you, Manish. A very warm welcome to all of you. And या प्रसंगाचेर तुमकां मोग मुगाचो येवकार. नमस्कार. And fine, did I make any mistakes? My job is very simple today. I'm your host this evening. My name is Heta Pandit. I'm also a Saligaonkar, and I'm very, very pleased to welcome and the whole panelists to add the release of the book that Yvonne has presented to us today. I would say it's a gift. So thank you, Yvonne. I will first start with an introduction of Isabel, not because you're the cutest person in the room. Isabel Vaz is a retired professor of English, Tempe College of Arts and Science, guest faculty, Goa University. She's a founder member of the Mustard Seed Art Company, and her books and articles, essays are many, but I'll just name a few. Frescoes in the Moon, 6 plays from Goa, Stage Lights, an anthology of plays on amazing lives, singular times, a time to act, which she edited. So welcome, Isabel, to this panel discussion. Bai actually does not need any introduction, but anyway, Damodar Mauzo Bhai, to us all, is a distinguished Goan novelist, short story writer, screenwriter, primarily writing in Konkani. He received India's highest literary honor, the 57th Gyanpith Award in 2022. His notable works include the novel Carmelin, which won Sahitya Academy Award in 1983, Tsunami Simon, and Jeev Diu Kachai Mala. Mauzo is a co-founder of the Goa Arts and Literature Festival, and is a vocal advocate for freedom of expression and Konkani identity. His essays in English were published in a collection titled Ink of Dissent. So welcome, Bhai. Joshi Lorenko. Joshi Lorenko is a writer, editor, and translator whose short stories, essays, and translations in Konkani and English have appeared in various anthologies and periodicals. He is the author of The Parish Churches of Goa, Study of Facade Architecture, The Fever and Other Stories, and The Wit and Wisdom of Ancient Goa, which I have on my desk and I flip over every morning, a collection of Konkani proverbs. He was editor of the Goa Streets Weekly and co-edited Peacock, the IPI Festival magazine. He is a practicing civil engineer based in Margao, and some of us know him as Jose Lorenzo. Warm welcome to you, Jose. And now I'll introduce the author. Yvonne Vaz is the author of Songs of Survivors, New Songs of the Survivors, The Exodus of Indians from Burma, This Is My Song, and is also part of several anthologies, including the anthology The Brave New World of Goan Writing, 2018. She has several articles, short memoirs, memories to her credit, and it will be my honor to invite the author herself to speak about the latest book, Shadows in Time. We're all set. Thank you.
I hope you don't mind me sitting and talking. I just want to say a few words about my book, this new book. Heather has already told you about my previous books. And this new book, Shadows in Time, was written, I started writing it about a year, more than a year ago. And then I took about 10 months, I think, writing through it. I'll just tell you a few things about the process of writing it. I started off in a very, what would I say, non-confident way. I didn't know that I would be able to write non-fiction. But the moment I started writing, this family took over my head, the family that I'm writing about. They took over my whole mind, and I got totally involved with them. I used to sit in front of my laptop from morning till evening, come down just for lunch and dinner, and my family called me a recluse. They couldn't understand what was wrong with me. So that is how it got over. I didn't take very long to finish it. But after that, I had to edit it. And that took some time because I got feedback from certain writers, and I belong to a writers club in Brisbane too, attend meetings there, and they gave me some feedback. And I also belong to Goa Writers Club, and this Goa Writers has been, I want to talk about it a bit. They have been so instrumental in encouraging me to write, never to give up in the middle of writing something, or, even if I make mistakes or anything, there's always a way out that I can write. So these Goa writers have been very supportive in my writing journey, and I really want to thank them. The vote of thanks normally happens much later, but I'm giving my vote of thanks now. Thank you to the Goa writers and to my writer friends in Brisbane who have helped me. There was someone called Jean. She did a lot from the Goa writers. She helped me a lot with the feedback and editing my work, and I'm very grateful to her too. I have chosen Isabel, Mai, and Jose to release my book, not just because they are writers or they are famous. I choose them because they are so good and kind, and I appreciate goodness in people. And although they are also good writers, they are also good human beings, and that's very important to me. So, thank you. And thank you all for coming. I said, before I forget my thank yous, I have to thank the Institute for allowing me to use the premises to release my book. And I also thank all of you who are present here today who have taken the trouble to come. Thank you so much. A little more about my book. I think most of you know that I have written non-fiction books about the war in Burma, the escape from Burma to India by boat. And I just want to introduce you to one of the survivors who's here today. Les Menezes was one of them. He was 2 years old, 2 years old. He was 2 years old when he came in the ship across, in the hold of the ship. I'm honored to know that there are still survivors around, and most of them, the survivors who have given me their stories, have all passed away. Most of them. There are just 2 or 3 left now. My Aunt Isa is still here, and the others. But I think I'm rambling. I'll go back again to my book. This book happened because I was thinking about the stories that were told to me in my previous books, in my non-fiction books, and those stories made history come alive for me. History was so dry otherwise, but these writers made it come alive for me. But then I wondered, I just got 28 stories or 30 stories, I think. What about the thousands of others? What happened to their stories? They must be lost, untold. And I said, I don't know if there were any interesting stories, love stories, where lovers parted, and any hearts broken because they had to separate during the war, or many other things could have happened, and that set my imagination going, and that's why I wrote this book. And I'm glad I did it because I learned a lot about writing fiction, which I never knew before. When you write fiction, it's so different from non-fiction. You have to worry that the characters don't say something out of character, or there are many things that you have to be so careful about when you write a non-fiction book. So I learned all those things. I used to go on YouTube and learn quite a bit. Read my old novels and find out what was interesting in them, how did they use dialogue, and all those things. So I'm glad that I wrote fiction because I learned so much from that experience. You can ask me anything later. I think I've told you enough now about my book. And thank you again for coming and listening.
Ladies and gentlemen, I've had a very cunning look at all the notes that Jose has by his side. And I'm going to invite him to moderate our conversation, discussion on shadowing.
We must acknowledge our four-legged friend and guest. Does anyone know his name? Good. Anyone knows his name? Okay, it's comfortable now. It's the first time I'm coming to the Saligaon Institute. It's a beautiful place. I'm very honored and happy to be here along with Bai, Isabel, and all of us. Yvonne has written a novel. This is, to me, quite a stupendous accomplishment. Bai, in all his 8 decades, right? Bai? Yeah, in 6.5 decades of writing, he has only written 3 novels. I have been struggling for 10 years now to write. I've only gotten past the first chapter. So the fact that Yvonne has completed writing a complete novel is something that we all must really applaud. So please give her a big hand. It's an amazing accomplishment. I write short stories. Isabel writes a lot of non-fiction and plays, a lot of plays, primarily, of course. And Bai writes a lot of short stories. He's got 6 or 7 collections of short stories. And we know what it takes to write a novel. And just like the beautiful necklace that Yvonne is wearing, with all those pearls and precious stones, she has added this novel, Shadows in Time, to the legacy of novels that have come from writers in Goa and about Goa. With that, I would like to ask my first question to Isabel, Yvonne, and Bai. Let's have a kind of broad overview of what are the finest or the most prominent novels that have emerged from Goa post 1961, or perhaps a couple of them prior to 1961. So, written in English, I know Benantao, Victor Angel, the Konkani writers, Pundik Naik, Mahabaleshwar Sail, Damodar Mauzo. So perhaps Isabel could tell us about 5 or 6 novels that she considers as prominent in the literary legacy of Goa.
Thank you. Jose, to tell you the truth, I am no expert on literature in Goa. I am a little bit sold on historical novels. I have read Yvonne's earlier books of non-fiction, her memoirs, and enjoyed them thoroughly. And to tell you a secret, one reason why I read them so avidly is that my maternal grandfather used to live and work in Burma, in Mandalay. I never met him, he died before I was born. But whenever she talked about Myanmar, Burma, something in me said, read it, it must be interesting. And it really was interesting. It was her story, the story of the people she knew, of the land that she was so familiar with, and Goa as well. I am interested in historical fiction, even coming from Goa, because that whole concept of history and fiction combined, I find very exciting, and always did. I think before I could read and write, we had an uncle at home who used to tell us about the Three Musketeers. And a little bit of the history of France came across to us through these stories that he would tell. I have been interested in something that was written recently called Colonial Sunsets by Alexandre Muniz Barbosa. And I keep asking myself, what is historical fiction really? Is it history? Is it some made-up stories about people who never existed and sort of latched on to some facts? And I realize that it is much deeper than that. There is research that goes into writing a historical novel, as for instance Alexandre has done with his. No, that was called Colonial Sunsets. And Bhai's Carmeline, for instance, touches upon one page of our history. All of the history of a people cannot come in one novel. But there's research that goes into it. There is a great deal of personal memory, I think. There is creativity. There are the voices of the characters that you have created. There is the author's own voice. And when I read Yvonne's Shadows in Time, I found it really exciting because her journey has come from memoirs to now historical fiction. And for me, it means the growth, the development of a writer. And that is one of the reasons why I enjoyed this novel so much. I have just received another historical novel which I haven't read. I think it's been published very recently. I intend reading it. Rescuing a River Breeze by Mrinalini Harchandran. And I just read one page and it is about the liberation of Goa. Yeah, so I am not a novelist. I can't say very much about writing novels. But I have written a few plays that touch upon history. And I can assure you that it's a challenging job to do that. one play that we did was, somebody told us, for gals, why don't you all write a play for 50 years of the liberation of Goa, which we did, and that was play, it was called Playing with the Eye of the Dragon. Then something else, I thought, nobody has written about, what shall I say, some of the things that happened in Goa which are not really historical, but which have changed the way Goa was. The opinion poll, for instance. And I wrote a short play which we performed, and it was called Voices After Me. So it is not history as in a history book, but it is the memories of a variety of people who remember what touches them. Everything is based on the history of their land. So thank you very much, Yvonne. This gave me an opportunity to think, an opportunity to reflect on the growth of a writer, and some more understanding of Burma as well as Goa, because these are the 2 points between which our characters move here. Thank you.
I'll come to Yvonne next. What Isabel said struck me at the very start. You mentioned an ancestor of yours who had been living in Burma. I think almost everyone here has had some ancestor who has been living in Africa or in Burma or other parts of Europe. And everyone here has a novel inside them waiting to get out. I was told that my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, he was on a merchant ship of the British merchant ship, and when World War II broke out, he was placed under house arrest in Japan, in Hong Kong. And then my grandmother travelled all the way from Goa to Hong Kong, and when she eventually came back, she was carrying my youngest aunt in her womb. So these are stories that we are told, and at that time we were too young to get the details of all those things. Like all my grandparents have passed away, and all these stories have gone along with them. So if you do have stories in you, please write them down, at least write down the details, so that at some point in time you can write your own novel. I come to Yvonne now. What are the novels from Goa, from Goan writers that you may have read or influenced, or even other novels? Just tell us a couple of novels that have inspired you.
I forget titles and names of authors and all that, but there were many historical fiction novels that I read. I think the places that I go to, the places I haven't been to, something like that. I forget titles, sorry, but I have read a lot, and because I read a lot, I forget the titles too. But one thing that we wanted to talk about in this session is that the novels in Goa, they tell about the changing times. They record the changing times. They are an archive. If you read a novel, you will see how life was different many years ago and how it is now, how it has changed. And to talk about my novel, I'll just give one example. This lady, she comes out and she gets a start when she sees someone sitting on her doorstep, a drunken beggar sitting on her doorstep. She gets so startled and afraid, and she screams out to the neighbor to come and help her. And the neighbor just comes and tells her, "Don't worry, he's just had too much feeling. Just give him some money, he'll go away." So she fished out some annas, she gave him. This was in 1942. Fished out some annas and gave him, and he went away. Then this lady was reminiscing. She's saying, all the doors are left open in the village. Nobody locks doors. Nobody closes doors. The doors are left open the whole day. And yet, these beggars, these drunken persons who need the money, they never enter a house and steal money. That is the culture of Goa. So that happened many years ago. I don't think it happens now. So that is something that has changed. And that's what I wanted to talk about. That sometimes when you read a novel, you'll see how it was many years ago and how things have changed now. You don't see that same situation anymore. There are lots of instances I could talk about, but I think I'll ask Rai to talk about.
Rather than facing new questions, I would rather prefer to answer the earlier questions. One about the books on Goa or the history of Goa. It is said that you should write your history, your own history. If you don't write your own history, somebody else writes, and it may not be just history. Most likely it will be distorted history. Now that you mention about Medhanini's book, which is about Goa, I wonder how much Medhanini has absorbed Goa. It is said that Goans do not write about their own history. And this is precisely I congratulate Yvonne for taking up the pen, and she wrote about that period. And when I say period, I want to distinguish between the historical novels and the period novels. Yours I can call it a period novel. It has historical facts about the World War blues which Burma has faced. You have been privy to many other things in Burma also. But then when you write down out of your memories or after listening to reminiscences of others, then it becomes more and closer to authentic. So I am very happy that you see, it is sad because even Isabel just mentioned about the memories. My favorite writer, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, has read, and I don't want to steal from him. He says, it does, what matters in your life is not what happens to you. It is how you remember it. Because everybody remembers, but your own way of remembering it, also it matters, how you perceive it. Whether you pursue it objectively, to tell the truth or your own truth. It can be different from others' truth. So this is very important point that one should write about your memories objectively, with a perception, with you have to rightly interpret it so that they are not distorted facts. Because when I read Yvonne's book, I consider it as authentic book about those days in Burma and those days in Goa. When somebody else, after a few years, will read it, you will probably get an authentic picture of those days. When I read Yvonne's, if somebody else writes, I wrote Carmelin. Carmelin is about the ayahs who worked, Goan women who went to Kuwait to serve as ayahs. And then, anyway, but I had not been to Kuwait until then. Though I desired to go, I didn't have, I couldn't afford to pay a visit to Kuwait, a country, just to write a novel. And I was not sure that I'm going to write a novel. I thought I was writing a short story. But it turned out to be a novel. That is another part of it, how you write a novel that you can discuss later. But I'm happy that I could finish the novel because now it is a document of those years, say late 60s, early 70s. It's a part of our history. Earlier Goans, just before liberation of Goa and the liberation of the East African as fiction. That is why historical fiction also is important. But historical fiction is different, history is different. That is why I prefer to call her book as a period novel.
Yes. I once read of Aldous Huxley and a couple of other European authors who had never been to the places that they wrote about, but they investigated deeply, because this responsibility becomes doubly serious when you have not been there, you have not experienced firsthand what that country or that place is like. Coming back to those novels of Goa, I have read Tivone by Victor Angel Ribeiro, Blood and Nemesis by Ben Antao, and then Sorrowing Lies My Lamb, Lambert Mascarenhas. In Konkani, there are several novels which I would like Bai to talk about. But coming back to Isabel, I would like to know her brief overview of Senor de Ira, or Lang Costa's novel, and the other one, the play that you translated from Portuguese to English.
Can I speak about the play?
Yes.
It is Centros na Coroas. It is a play written by Orlando da Costa on Liberation Day. It's a story of a family in Rangoon. And what happened to them as they heard that the Indian army was advancing into Goa. Goa University decided to get the book translated, and they asked me if I would. Anything to do with theatre, I say yes to. So I translated it from Portuguese to English. And when António Costa, the then Prime Minister of Portugal, came to India, he was given a copy of the book, which he was very grateful for. But anything that anybody writes is only one page. For instance, the liberation of Goa. However much people will write, there's always somebody else's experience. There's always somebody else's interpretation. For instance, this particular play is about one family and an adopted child who has run away and comes back and cannot really move easily because there is war. It is also symbolic, this business of adopted child. But if you talk to the people who lived through the years of liberation, through the days of liberation, each one has a unique and powerful story to tell. If you allow me, this is a personal touch. The house of Orlando Costa is just 2 minutes away from my mother's house in Margao. And I will tell you about their experience of liberation. When the Indian army was about to enter Goa, everybody knew. Everybody was talking about it. The Indian army is about to enter. We lived in Panjim, and we lived 1 minute away from a bridge, small bridge. And there was this information going around that all the bridges in Goa had been mined and that they would be blasted off. So somebody came and told my dad, "Do you think it's a good idea living here? I think you should move." So we are originally from Aldana. We packed our bags and we went home. was not dynamited. But from our house in Aldana, we could hear a bridge in Mapsa being blasted. We could hear it. And something else happened. In my mother's house in Margam, that was a main road going by, so somebody went and told the old lady, who was my grandmother, "You all are going to stay here? This is risky. So you better move to some village." And she said, "Okay, I have relatives in Raya." So they packed a few bags and they went to their relatives in Raya. And it so happened that the Indian army passed by the house in which she was staying in Raya. She got a heart attack, she fell and died. This is Liberation Day. And her son, who was a doctor, who had come from Portugal and was home, could do nothing for his mother because everything was closed. And she died. And somebody came through this state of war. They came from Margam to Aldana to inform my mother that her mother had passed away. What I'm trying to say is that even a play by Orlando da Costa in some ways involves us, our personal histories. They are not the same, identical, but they are related. And these are such important moments in our histories, our various histories, that everyone has a story to tell. I am convinced of that. And of course, there are perspectives and perspectives. There are interpretations and interpretations. I am happy that this particular play by Orlando Costa is being studied now by students in the English version. But they have lots of questions to ask about Liberation Day. What was it like? And just 2 years ago, please allow me to say this, we staged the play at Goa University with the students plus some of my mustard seed friends at the university. And some of the people who were sitting in the audience said, "I used to know Orlando Costa. Can I say something?" And this lady came up on stage and she said this and that and the other, because he was Goan as well. He lived there, but he was from Goa. And she is from Portugal, but she finds a strong connection with Goa. So history is like this, interspersed and interconnected. Sorry if I said
This is very powerful song. As Konkani Munta Angar Kanto, the hair stood on the back of my neck when she said how tragic that this should happen as a parallel to what happened. I think in every place there is always one major event which is burnt into their memory, and 1961 was that for Goa. Because how else can you explain that it features in Blood and Nemesis, in Benantha's novel very prominently. The novel closes with that as the climax, giving details about how the entire Operation Vijay took place and how both sides of the story narratives took place. Then you have Sorrowing Land also has references to 1961. Bai's novella Sood means revenge. It was also turned into a film. That also revolves around 1961. And there are many, so that seems to have been one of the most traumatic and pivotal events in the history of Goa, and it is manifesting itself through the literature and writings of that generation. Younger generation may not know much about it. They will just read in history books. But the older generation has experienced that. Their parents and grandparents have gone through that. And Bai himself had a very funny anecdote that took place on the 18th and 19th December. Perhaps he will tell us about it. But I want to come to Yvonne. I feel that your traumatic event in Burma was that 1941 bombing, which you describe in the novel and in your other accounts as well. So can you tell us more about this pivotal event in your life and in the place that you live? 1961 did mean the same to you as that bombing? Does it?
To say I wasn't alive, I wasn't born back then. It's just what I heard about. When I looked at old.
No, meaning.
Yeah. What I heard was, what made it important to me was my father and the maids and all the old people, they always used to tell us, don't waste food. During the war, we never had enough food to eat. And all those kind of things, And it was always about the war, what they went through during the war. So for me, it was all second-hand talk. But it did affect me. Because my father told me that when they walked across, they couldn't even pick up the grass to eat. They had to sleep on the ground and chew the grass off the ground and eat it. So those kind of stories touched me. I think that's why I decided to write about it and ask people who had really gone through it, the survivors. They told me about it. It's not my actual experiences, it's just what I've heard from others, what others have told me. So, but it did affect. I felt that it was important in the lives of everyone.
Thanks, Yvonne. Why can you briefly talk about the Konkani novels, and they are carrying a kind of archive of the times of Goa and the Konkani people?
So there are umpteen number of novels written in Konkani which deal with or touch upon this topic. But then there are few, including Konkani, which touch upon this topic, either pre-liberation, post-liberation. But I would rather prefer to talk about a short story written by Sheila, which is called Gap. It's about just...
I don't mean about specific 1961, let's move on from there. But how the Konkani novels written by all these, the great Konkani novels, how they carry the archive of the whole history, in what way?
Yeah, we all know that literature did not exist in Konkani except for few romances, many romances rather, and other short stories and plays and other things. But actually, the real, I would say, the modern literature began just before liberation, but post-liberation it took off in full-fledged way. Kundalini Naik's novel, which is a very significant novel, deals with the scenario when in the name of development, people started mining business, which affected the life of common people. The character of their villages, character of their personal lives was changed because of that. Then Mahaveshwar Sai, who is also a very significant writer, who is also an awardee of Saraswati Samman, another prestigious award, he has written a novel called Hindu. It is targeted into English as Age of Frenzy. That deals with actually very touchy subject, but then deals very objectively about the period of conversions that happened and post-conversions when Inquisition was imposed, and what was the social fabric then and how it changed. And then there are other novels which are also topical, which speak about the state of affairs in our state, Goa, particularly the advent of drugs. They never heard of drugs until liberation, even soon after liberation, it was not known. But suddenly drugs entered the state, and it affected the people, particularly the youngsters. Then there were the effects of over-drinking on the common people who suffered because of the drinking people. Even in Carnelian, you will find the husband was drinking, which forced Carnelian to take to the job as hire to go to Kuwait. But then there are many novels, including some of the novels like Ramnath Gowde, another young man, rather he was young and he wrote it, Talat of Hathur. It's about Literate Quarry, Cheriachi Khurd, which was doing illegal business in Goa, and how it affected the villages, how it corrupted the people. He speaks very openly about it. And because he was connected with the panchayat, working of the panchayat, he was working for his own panchayat in Dharwanoda somewhere. So his account was very authentic about it. So for the first time, he spoke openly about the corruption that was happening at that level. So many novels which were written and which are being written are significant in terms of the content, the topic and everything. But I think there is still space to write about our past, our history, which Yvonne has touched upon. But there are many things which people have not touched upon. Now, for example, opinion poll, which has affected each and every Goan in our state. Is there any literature about it? Hardly. We have references to that event. We have references to what happened to the opinion poll, which is also, we can call it a referendum. The first referendum in our country. Nowhere else it happened. But under the name of opinion poll, it was, yet again, it was a referendum. We are singled out in terms of this event, political event. But hardly you find anything written about it. So it is very necessary that we touch upon. What about the language education? It was a fight for our identity. So how we claim that we have achieved the goal, but have we achieved the goal? Was it our ultimate goal? So that is evading us. That's what I think. But yes, to attract the attention of the leadership, it is necessary to write about these events which have become the history or become the things of the past.
So again, we come to these traumatic events. The Inquisition was another very traumatic period. And the other novel that I can think of is Wartime and Goa by Uday Bemre. He spoke about that. That's, you could say, historical fiction. And he also wrote about Abhay Faria, Katur Repaji, Uday Bemre's novel Katur Repaji. So we do have those events. Talking about the language agitation in 87-88, I was in engineering college in Pharmagudi. And so Goa was shut down completely, and I had to get home. I was at the hostel in Pharmagudi. So I had no option but to walk. So I walked from Pharmagudi down to Ponda, from Ponda, we call it Ponda there. So from Ponda to Rangoon, and on the way I saw many things, like Bob Dylan would say, like I saw many things that passed by. Some of these local gundas had cut a trench in the road. There were no cars, no buses anyway. Even a few cars, even a scooter or motorcycle, it had to cross on a narrow plank and cross a trench, for which they had to pay 5 rupees to the guy who was handling that trench. So everyone paid 5 rupees and carefully took their scooter on top. Sometimes they put 2 planks and let a car pass through. So I saw a lot of these things, and I kept walking from Ponda to Margaon. I lived in Veli, so at Naveli, Shishni, Asalna, Veli. And by the time I got home, the moon was up in the sky, so it was quite an experience. Although I ran 10 kilometers recently, but that day I walked around 35 or 40 kilometers and walked. So I think we have covered a lot of ground. Again, those traumatic events, I would say right from 1510, 25th November 1510, Alphonse Albuquerque comes to Goa, and that's his second conquest of Goa. The first one took place in May, as we all know, when then Adil Shah drove him out with his troops. Alphonse Albuquerque took his ships and he waited in the Arabian Sea until reinforcements would come from Portugal after the rains. And meantime, Yusuf Adil Shah passed away, and there was his child, a son, on the ruling. And when those reinforcements came on 25th November 1510, the day of Saint Catherine's feast, Alphonse Albuquerque captured Goa again. And he was so mad at the Muslim population of Valley of Goa, Ella, what it was called under Portuguese Adil Shah's time, that he slaughtered around 6,000 Muslim men, women and children. And it's recorded in the archives. He wrote a letter to the king. He said it was a deed well done. So you can imagine that was one of the first massacres in early history of Goa. So that's a traumatic event. And then you have the Inquisition, a long period of terrible times. And then you had the 1961, the liberation of Goa, a complete changeover. The opinion poll, 1967 and 1987, the language agitation. And now we have subtler ways of complete change with the Goan population migrating out to Europe during that period before Brexit. We changed the topography of our villages, turned many of these places into ghost towns. The houses are beautiful, but there's no one living there. So there's a lot to write about. So if any one of you wants to write novels, there's plenty of material that you can take. Just take one of those ideas and talk to people and build on it. We have Mario Coelho somewhere here. Mario, there he is, quietly sitting behind. Mario is a lovely writer. He's quite humble. He has recently published a collection of short stories, horror stories, ghost stories. And he went and talked to people and he got their experiences and they fictionalized that. And that's what gives his stories authenticity. So I think, as Bai said, we have to write our own histories, otherwise someone else will write it for us. And they will distort it. I read one book once upon a time in Sunaparanta, which was published by Penguin. It was such an atrocious novel, stereotyping Goa with an almost vicious, hatred of Goa, contempt of Goa. And I was shocked because I always admired Penguin as a publisher. My grandfather's books published by Penguin, many of them first editions, are highly respected in our cupboard at home. And that Penguin would publish such trash, I was appalled by that. So things can go wrong. Someone else decides to write your history and he's going to produce a warped and distorted and hateful edition of it. Only we are to blame because we just sat quietly and we did not write. So, all the best to all of us for future novels to come. Ita?
Thank you so much, Isabel, Yvonne, Kai, and Jose. Like we say, we understood from Yvonne's book and her previous books and other novels that our panelists have spoken about, that there are layers and layers and layers in every novel and every story also. So one of the things is, like we say in Konkani, Sole Bhitar Sole, Sole Bhitar Sole. There are layers and layers. You can start with a personal history and go wider and wider and wider, as wide as your lens allows it to go, and encapsulate the history of the land, the history of the country, the history of the state of Goa also. I'm going to open it to 5 questions only. Before we invite our panelists to release the book officially, a moment that all of us have been waiting for. So, 5 questions, I'll pass the mic around.
This is aside from your experiences and your parents' experience in Burma. Did they talk that the last emperor, Mughal emperor, was exiled and living in Burma? Did they talk about that? Because he lived there, his family. He was exiled by the British. Zafar, I think, he was the last Mughal emperor.
Bahadur Shah Zafar.
Yeah, he
Bahadur
was.
Shah.
Pardon? Because subsequently, I think he died after 42.
There is a tomb of the Mughal emperor in Rangoon. There is a tomb there. I've heard about it.
Maybe somebody should write about that.
The Brits also brought their king here. They brought their king to Ratnagiri, and if you go there, you can still see the Thibaw Palace, what they call the Thibaw Palace.
He's not talking
Yeah,
about the king.
no. The Shah was taken there, and the king Thibaw was brought here.
Bahadur Shah Zafar.
Yeah,
He was brought to Ratnagiri.
Thibaw.
Royal family from Rangoon was brought to Ratnagiri.
Yeah.
Another question, please. Other one?
Could you tell us about your actual time that you spent in Burma, and does it have resonances with also your time you spent in Goa? Because I imagine you would find some similarities and some dissimilarities. It would be interesting to hear that.
I would say that life in Burma was completely different from life in Goa. I found it so strange when I came here in 1982. I did not know the language. I did not know the customs and traditions, although we were a Goan family living in Burma, and I heard a lot of stories from my grandmother and all that. But life was completely different there. I had a lot of Buddhist friends. We lived in a Buddhist society, and our lifestyle was very Buddhist. Like I mentioned, I said, till today, I don't like to kill a small insect or some animal because that was what we used to do there. But there are other things too that I got used to in Burma because I lived there for over 30 years. So when I came to Goa, it was completely different. To tell you the truth, I took a long time to get used to life here. But once I set down my roots here, I think I really love the place. And I felt my ancestors calling or whatever you can say about it. But I really love the place now. And when I go and live in Brisbane, I think of coming back to Goa all the time. I don't want to go back to Burma because it's so changed now. But our life in Burma was happy. It was very good. It's not like what it is now. We had a very nice life, peaceful life. But what you say is life similar there and here. It's totally different. But I've learned to love both places. I've learned to belong to both places. I've learned to love both places.
Just one thing.
I'll just repeat that. I said, I've learned to love both Burma and Goa. And I find
Take this.
it's okay. The differences don't matter anymore. It is, I think, setting down roots here, and I also had my roots there because I was born and brought up there. So I think what matters is the community, the people, and those two things matter a lot to me. I'm happy in both places.
Let's see if there's one more question. 3 more. What? You have a question.
First, you could take one.
Anyone in the audience?
In the synopsis that Yvonne gave by Isabel and me, there's mention of some talk, some advice on psychology and some Buddhist approaches to dealing with trauma. Could you?
Anything. I think it's very important because I've learned my lessons with that wise advice that I had. And another thing that you asked was about the trauma. The trauma happened because with these two teenage girls because they had to leave everything behind, experience the bombings and all that, and then come away to a new place which they didn't like at all, to Sangolda, and to live in that society. It was very difficult for them. And the main thing is the bombings, they traumatized them. So one of them was so traumatized that she couldn't live a normal life. She had to take treatment. She couldn't sleep well. She had to take treatment. But she was very intelligent. So she wrote a lot in her journal. And that helped her to get over her trauma, writing her thoughts out in a journal. And the other trauma was that this other girl, she kept it all hidden. She didn't tell anyone. She didn't complain about it to anyone. But in her later years, she couldn't bear to think about Burma or talk about Burma. And then her son made her face it. He tried to bring her out to talk about it, to accept whatever she had gone through. And after talking about it, she changed. That's how her trauma was not totally healed. Sometimes trauma doesn't get healed totally. But at least you learn to live with it, you learn to handle it. That's what I learned. That's what I wrote about.
When you spoke about not being attached to anything, the Buddhist approach, I was reminded of that line from the Bhagavad Gita, "Phal ka chinta mat karo, parivartan duniya ka niyam hai." So I think in Hinduism also there has been this approach of non-attachment to material things and outcomes. I have a personal question to ask you now. Has this novel been a way of catharsis for you, of dealing with trauma, or telling something very deep from within which you wanted closure to?
I don't think so. At least I don't feel that's what happened to me. I wrote about the trauma because I was a counselor and I learned a lot about healing trauma and all that. I learned a lot about healing trauma and hearing other people's stories and how trauma affected them. So that was what I brought up. And the Buddhist philosophy was something that was a part of me because I grew up in Burma. I always tell everyone I'm half Catholic, half Buddhist. Till today I am still like that. And I remember all the way of life in Burma. And no, I don't think it is a catharsis of anything. I think my memoir was more that. The last book I wrote, this is my song. That was my memoirs. And I think there I brought up things that I had not written about before. And that was cathartic. But this was just something that came to my head and I wrote about it.
Before we hand over to Heta, there's some closing comments from Isabel and Bai.
Congratulations.
I think Yvonne is a good listener. You just mentioned about listening to stories by others. Because you are a good listener, you are a good writer. And just before we close, I think somehow we have forgotten to mention daughter's story, Goa daughter's story. Which also dwell upon the psyche of Goan people, particularly the Catholics, during the liberation, pre-liberation, post-liberation scenario, and very objectively she has written. So I should have mentioned anyway somehow in this.
Yes, I know that when we talk about something that happened, it's not always our experience too. We learn from other people. We listen to other people and we learn from them. Like for example, I didn't know anything about Sangolda. Is Marcus from Sangolda here? He said he would come. You're from Sangolda, but you're not the Marcus. I used to ask questions. Well, while I was writing the book, Marcus said he would he asked to come to the book launch today. I was hoping he would come. I asked him a lot of questions about old Sangolda. And Jose helped me so much with the Konkani phrases. I am not very good in Konkani. Every now and again I would ask Jose, how do you spell this? How do you say this? How do you express this in Konkani? And he was so patient and answered all my questions. So the point I'm trying to make is that you don't have to know everything. You can find out things. You can ask other people. You can learn from others, listen to others. And I think that's very, very important. And writing about it is a choice. But everyone should start, I think, make a little effort, write at least a little journal, something interesting that happened to you. Like my brother sometimes writes about little things that he finds interesting in Goa, and it comes out in the church bulletin. Like that, you can write something that interests you, and you can ask around and find out.
Just a small aside, we must listen to each other. As you can see here, Bai and I are the only two South Goans, right, Bai? Right? All of you are not Goans? South Goan, yeah. My good friend Cecil Pinto there, he's always ribbing me. When he talks to his friend, hey, he's a South Goan, he's a South Goan. Like, as though across the river, all of us, different. But then I know he says that with a lot of love as well, because he's come over to my place in Wheeling very often, and we've always had a good time. So even in Goa itself, between North Goa and South Goa, we have different ways. And when Yvonne would ask me about some Konkani phrase, I would tell her, see, we say like this in South Goa, we say like this in ABCC, Asolna Veli Kokoli Shishini. Okay, and so you may be saying it like this in Bangladesh. So across our dialects, across our cultures, we have a lot of things. We say ator or the bamboo mat. You all say dai or something, right, Cecil? What do you call the bamboo mat? At last I get to embarrass Cecil. So it's really beautiful how Goa itself, such a small, the tiniest state of India, has got so many different subcultures, dialects. Between my house in Bailey, which is near the church, and my wife's house, which is 800 meters away, we have different ways of speaking in Konkani. So, I would say, Auntie was on Bostalon. I would say that, right? And she would say, Auntie was on Boso. So, Auntie Bostale, and she's saying, Auntie was on Boso. And I'd say, what is this funny way of speaking Konkani? So it's like that. And yet we are all together as a people. As Hita said, it's as big as your lens can take you. So while in our everyday lives we deal with all these little differences, the larger lens is that of our beloved Goa. Yeah, thank you.
If there are no other questions, shall we ask our... Yes?
Hello. The Menezes family is what's selected in the novel. I'm from the Menezes family. And of course, we are survivors from Rangoon. We came out in 1941. And of course, your novel says this comes out in 1940. How do you select a Menezes family? I was intrigued by that.
I think there are many Menezes families in Rangoon.
Yes.
Donald Menezes is not related to you, right? Donald Menezes. I knew many families with the Menezes name. And the first name that came to me when I selected a Goan family was Menezes.
Thank you.
Could have been inspired by your brother.
Thank you for that. Shall we now release the book? Yes? The beautiful Apodi class, whoever's idea that was, congratulations to them.
Beautiful day of First time like that.
Can I ask you to take a picture?